Hello and welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about mobile security and the threat landscape. Did you know that on average, mobile phones receive between 300 or 400 notifications daily? This is equivalent to a sock without a SIM. It's information overload and alert fatigue happens. So imagine John is a senior exec at a webinar, this is a webinar, at a web company and is watching England beat Ireland at Twickenham in the Six Nations. He receives an urgent Teams message from his CFO on a company managed phone requesting some information. As the second half is about to start, he uses the public Wi-Fi in his box to access SharePoint. He receives an authenticate credentials email. As the players return to the pitch, John follows the instructions in the email and logs into his account, triggering the push notification-based MFA. He clicks on approve and accesses the files needed to send to the CFO just in time for the whistle. John thinks that the authenticate credentials notification was triggered by him accessing the files at that time. He didn't think twice. However, an attacker used a fake login page to capture the credentials and then access the real system, triggering the MFA request. John unknowingly approves the attacker's MFA request, granting full account access. The attacker is now positioned to launch a ransomware attack, extract information, or sell on that access. So this typical scenario, fairly typical, demonstrates kind of real phishing or phishing in real time with MFA bypass, which could lead to potential problems in the future. Public Wi-Fi adds to the risk, obviously, when dealing with sensitive data. So how do we prevent events like this from occurring? And how do we control the systems that can be exploited whilst maintaining flexibility and convenience? And I'm Craig Lusher, Product Principal at Content 8. And today we're going to be talking to you about mobile security blind spot and why it's a nightmare for CISOs. Okay, so Content 8 has been around for 25 years. We've work in regulated and environments, and we have multiple security solutions. But a gap in our arsenal was always that enterprise. We have endpoint protection, but we didn't have anything that worked for the mobile fleet. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to a co-host, Colm Healy from Corrata. Colm, can you tell me a little bit about Corrata and the solution that we have today and yourself?
Thanks very much, Craig. Look, delighted to join you here today. Really delighted to see our partnership with Continent 8 flourishing as it is, and delighted to be here with many of our mutual clients and customers to talk about this really important topic, as you say. We're Corrata is a privacy-focused mobile endpoint security provider. We were I would describe us as probably the pioneer in protecting mobile devices using on-device network traffic inspection. We have over 1,200 clients primarily across North America and Northern Europe today. We're headquartered in Dublin in Ireland, but our software is used globally. The key thing is that we've managed to develop technology which works equally well on both corporate owned and BYOD devices, and also aligns with employees' expectations around privacy, which today is a critically important element of what we do.
Okay, thank you very much. So today we're going to talk about different topics here and the evolving digital workspace. So we all know, especially since COVID, people are moving more towards remote working. They work from the office part-time, they work from home part-time, the cafe, the pub, wherever they might be, and they consume that corporate data in different ways. And a lot of SaaS providers exist nowadays, and obviously we're consuming the same content from our laptops on our mobile devices, so tablets and phones, etc. So we're going to look at how that workspace has evolved and what the threats are now to business and how that's changed. The risk of bring your own devices, what does that mean, and how can we mitigate them? and look at strategies to address those kind of mobile blind spots that we've seen. So, as I mentioned, the way people work has changed. We're now in a hybrid or remote working situation. I'm here at home. Attending the office is, something of a rarity these days. The adoption of cloud and SaaS apps, as I mentioned, is just the norm now. We have 20 or 30 applications that we can assume on a daily basis, and information is passed, from the corporate device or from the BYD device, and it accesses those applications as well as work-hosted applications as well. So, Colm, can you tell us a bit about the mobile devices and how they're, what their role is here?
Yeah, Craig. Look, I mean, you've highlighted a really important point. I mean, in recent years, the relationship between the mobile device and the corporate IT environment has fundamentally changed. I mean, many of us, I imagine, remember the days of BlackBerry. We also remember the early days of the iPhone and Android phones when we were just absolutely delighted that we could get access to email and possibly some file share on our devices. And that's very much the way that people in, I think, the information security community and indeed in IT more generally have that's the model that they have in their heads about what we're doing with mobile. But today, the particularly driven, I guess, by the pandemic and the general move towards cloud and digital transformation, today essentially the mobile device is part of our IT landscape. It's on the same footing as our traditional laptops and desktops. Essentially, we can get access to pretty much all of the information that you can access from your network, from your traditional laptop or desktop VPN into your network. You can get access to all of that information on your mobile device. So whether you lose your mobile device, whether an attacker somehow manages to get control of your mobile device, whoever has that device really has what you might call the keys to the kingdom. And in fact, that's made the mobile device become even more central as we've moved towards using mobile-based authenticator apps for MFA. So I think what's happened is that we've moved ahead, as it were, with our use of mobile, given effectively 100% access to the corporate environment, but literally with zero visibility of what's actually happening on those devices. And part of the problem, I believe, is that if the InfoSec team talk to their mobile specialists, they'll say, look, yeah, we're good. We're good. We're secure. We've secured the devices with mobile device management. We use mobile application management for BYOD. So from that perspective, we've done our job. We believe that we've secured our devices. The reality is, when you start to drill into that, you discover that the threats that are the things that the attackers are targeting our mobile devices are completely aren't covered in any way by mobile device management. So the security tooling that we've got in place really doesn't address the threats that our workforce is subject to. The biggest threat is around phishing. Now, the issue, I think, when we talk to people about the phishing threat, everybody is in this email phishing mindset. They go, oh yeah, well, okay, phishing email, so we've got to protect the email service, we've got to put in anti-phishing filters and other types of software to stop bad emails getting into people's inboxes. But what's happened in the last couple of years is that attackers, they continue to attack the inbox, but they're also attacking and seeking to exploit all of the other messaging channels that we now have. Like, think of it yourself. I mean, even just managing the number of different ways that people can contact us today has become quite difficult at times. And the attackers are using those channels in the same way they exploited email. They're exploiting SMS, they're exploiting WhatsApp, they're exploiting Teams and Telegram, and they're exploiting Slack. And so they're getting their lures into these messaging channels. What's also happened is that just in the example you described, Craig, of someone getting a message to being asked to authenticate an access request and clicking it somewhat without really taking too much care. That kind of MFA bypass attack has become very common as well, and it's, there was a time when this was kind of considered a sophisticated attack. So an adversary in the middle attack using maybe a proxy, that was considered to be, you needed it was the honors class in terms of your cyber criminals who were doing that. But now with these phishing toolkits designed specifically to target mobile, specifically to leverage that when MFI bypass, all of that is becoming much more prevalent across all tiers of the cyber attack landscape.
Thank you. Thank you, Colm. So, but I want to just interrupt quickly and mention that we're offering a cybersecurity. So what are we offering? We're offering a cybersecurity kind of like a review. And if you want to take part in that, you can either wait till the end of the show when there's a QR code for you to scan if you want to risk that, or you can just show your interest here, and we can continue with that. So that's whether you'd like that security audit. Obviously, QR codes are part of our every day at the moment, and we know that we will need to still be able to use these and interact with them, but you've got to just be mindful and know that, trust what you're clicking, right, and trust what you're looking at.
Absolutely, absolutely, Craig. And like when you brought that up, and you told me you're going to get people to scan a QR code to take part in the security audit, I thought it actually highlighted kind of the double-edgedness of QR codes, because on the one hand, they are tremendously convenient and they are part of the digital landscape today. So look, I mean, people use QR codes, they're fantastically convenient, whether you find them in the real world, the physical world, or whether they are delivered to you in an email, for instance, online, and you take your phone out to scan them. But what we're also seeing is that attackers are exploiting that. And I mean, this is a great, the attack that we recently observed at one of our clients is a really good example of the kind of threat that's out there today. So this one in particular leveraged QR codes, and it's interesting to understand why QR codes are attractive to attackers. Why is it that they're using them? And I'm not talking about the QR code that's attached to a parking meter, for instance, at a sort of consumer level scam. This is more, how are they being leveraged within the cyber attackers who are targeting enterprises. So in this case, this is one of our clients, a large, well-known UK-based logistics company. Probably people on the webinar would actually recognize. They probably see their trucks, their vans every day. In this case, what happened was one of their suppliers had been compromised, and the attacker had then used the supplier's email account to send out emails purporting to be from that, purporting to be legitimate. The actual QR code was embedded within a PDF, which was embedded within the email. So a lot of email scanners are very poor at picking up that kind of, identifying that kind of threat or that kind of a phishing attack. And so the key thing was that once the employee opened that PDF, they were encouraged to scan a QR code. And of course, to scan a QR code, why scan a QR? Why would they want them to scan a QR code? There's a very, very specific reason. It's because the attackers know that the vast majority of mobile phones out there don't have enterprise-grade anti-phishing toolkits or tools on them. So they're not protected in any way. They take out the QR code, they click on it, they go to the link. The link is this malicious link, which, had you got some sort of anti-phishing software or mobile threat defense software on your phone, it would have been blocked. But instead, you end up on the phishing, the fake login page. Now, in this attack, I suppose the good news from our customer's perspective was that Corrata was installed on their employees' phones. Corrata blocked the attack. But also what was neat is, because Corrata is typically integrated with the customer's SIEM, the news of the fact that this attack was taking place was immediately passed on to the security operations team, and they were then able to go and intercept the other email, quarantine essentially all of the other emails from this supplier that had been sent on to employees in the company. Without a tool like ours in place for this organization, they're likely the employee would have put their credentials into the fake login page. And what's more, this was set up as what's called a adversary in the middle attack. And essentially their aim wasn't just to steal the login credentials, but their objective was also to steal the authentication cookie. So when the user actually successfully passed two-factor, second factor, or MFA, the attacker now had the session cookie, which meant that they could go off and log in and have in some cases, quite long-lasting access to that account. So, that's we think phishing over, let's call them, it's really social engineering is probably a better word to talk about this. Phishing is just one tactic within that, but phishing or social engineering targeting the weaknesses in information security defenses on the mobile phone. That's really probably the threat that most organizations see on a day-to-day basis. That's what we see on a day-to-day most often. However, I don't want to talk today without drawing attention to the threat of advanced malware. So, the people will probably on the call will have been familiar with the attacks called from spyware called Pegasus that have been publicized pretty frequently. And these attacks they exploit vulnerabilities in the underlying operating system. So it's not just Pegasus. There are a whole range of other Hermit, Predator, all sorts of named attack or malware types that are targeting mobile devices, both Android and iOS. And I think this is really important for people to be aware of. There are every month, if not more frequently, vulnerabilities in these ubiquitous operating systems are being patched. It's absolutely fantastic the way Apple and the Android ecosystem react to this stuff and actually look to patch those vulnerabilities. But the reality is these operating systems are complex. They are so ubiquitous and so widely used that we are continuing to see vulnerabilities being discovered. Not alone are we continuing to see vulnerabilities being discovered, but we're also continuing to see vulnerabilities being exploited. So on that graph that you can see on the right-hand side, you'll see the trend in known exploited vulnerabilities on iOS. This means that the bad guys have actually not alone discovered the vulnerability, but they've actually successfully, we as in the defenders know that it's been successfully exploited. There are others that have been successfully exploited that we don't know about. So really important to keep your devices patched and up to date, but also particularly if you're dealing in sensitive sectors, or maybe not even sensitive sectors, but if you think about your senior executives or other high value targets within your organization, protecting them from this kind of attack is something that people shouldn't neglect to do. So it's not enough, I would say, to make sure you've dealt with the phishing or the social engineering threat. You also need to make sure you're well positioned to address this threat as well.
Would you mind me asking, I mean, with the increasing affordability of iOS exploits on the dark web, which seems quite surprising to me in the first place, compared to Android, that is, how is that actually impacting the overall mobile threats? I mean, is there a big differences and changes since this has kind of gone through the years, or what are we seeing now?
I think the big change that signaled is that there was a perception that if you went all iOS, you were good. Equally, there was a perception that if you went, if you were using Android, you were potentially exposing your organization unnecessarily to risk, right? I would say our assessment today is the two platforms are both good platforms, but you're equally likely to be exploited on one rather than the other. So there's been, there is this, I would say, let's give, in certain segments, particularly sensitive sectors, there's this perception, let's give everybody an iPhone and we're okay. I think that's reeks of complacency to me. But equally, there's sometimes organizations who go, we'll never use Android. And I think that reeks of maybe, that's not actually really based on a firm risk assessment of the relative risk of Android versus iOS today.
Okay, interesting. Okay, thank you.
So I just thought I'd just highlight this because this is the email you never want any of your employees to have received. So the Apple have, and indeed Google have programs in place to try to help their users not fall foul to this kind of spyware, and they do lots of good work to try to prevent that. But ultimately, if they detect changes that they believe indicate that spyware has become embedded in your phone, this is the kind of message that you get. Unfortunately, I would say that by the time you get this message, the bad guys will already have had an opportunity to wreak significant damage. So we like to say that our job is to make sure that none of our customers ever get a message like this. So I think it's also, I think Craig, you mentioned earlier that we would talk about BYOD, and there is definitely, I mean, we see among our customers and just people we speak to more generally that there is a rise in the use of BYOD, and I think that's just driven by the fact that we are driving digital transformation across organizations even more effectively. So more and more employees are able to do their work on their phones, not just to access email or file share, but also to use key line of business applications. So that means that most organizations, and I know we often talk to organizations and they say, no, we only allow corporate-owned devices on our network. And actually then when we drill into it, we discover that, well, actually we do have some people using BYO. And then when they go and actually do a bit of an audit, and we'd help them to do this, they discover that they have significant numbers of employees who access business critical information on unmanaged or BYOD devices. And I guess the challenge with BYOD is not that it's inherently bad, it's just that it's difficult to secure, because unlike managed devices where you have some visibility and governance over the configuration of the device, so you can make sure that at least at the configuration level the device is well positioned. You don't have that with BYOD, and that's really the risk with BYOD, and that's why we have specifically sought with our customers to address that issue with particular technology approaches.
Okay, Colm. So I mean, how can organizations effectively strike a balance between the productivity benefits of BYOD and the security risks outlined, and particularly the challenge of that shadow IT, lack of visibility into the device security posture? What can be done?
Yeah, well, so one approach that we've seen as very effective and has really great promise, I think, to address this problem, is having a solution in place, which means that when a BYOD device looks to access a corporate application. So literally they're logging in to your CRM, to your HR system, whatever it might be, that at that point, a risk assessment is done on the device in order to see whether it's secure or not. So this means you don't have to manage the device on an ongoing basis, but at that moment when the device is looking to access the application, you have tooling on the device which allows you pick up the signals to tell you whether this device is good or bad. So that's a new approach. It's one we've pioneered, and certainly the response from many of our customers, particularly the ones who have large BYOD fleets, is that this is a very good approach to balancing that kind of, we don't want to spend loads, we don't have to manage every single employee's device. We don't want to have to spend the money on equipping all of our employees with phones, but we still want the benefits of digital transformation across all our workforce, not just maybe our more senior staff or office-based staff. We also want all of those field service workers and various others out in, or even maybe contractors or people who are less tightly bound to your company. We want them to be able to take advantage of digital transformation, and we're concerned about the security risk. So how can we balance those two in a way that keeps our data and our applications secure? So yeah, we see that as having great promise, and we look forward to working with our customers in the future to deliver on that.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's great. Sure.
So yeah, so Craig, thanks for this. This slide really is, from my perspective, I hope it's a good summary of the things that you need to avoid when you're looking at mobile security and trying to understand risk, assess it, and address it. So the first thing is mobile device management is good. It's a useful tool, but it's not threat defense. It's not defending your employees, your workforce, your mobile device users against the threats that we talked about, whether they be advanced malware or social engineering attacks. So that's kind of probably the key takeaway in many ways for people on this call, at least in terms of how to look at this landscape, at this threat landscape. Whether you're iOS or Android, really, you don't think that by choosing one or the other that does away with the problem. It doesn't. They're both high quality, great operating systems. They've delivered so much value to organizations since the smartphone was debuted back in 2007, 2008. But they don't really, we only use iOS is not an answer to the question, are you securing your mobile devices? Another aspect of that is, again, app stores. It's great that we have these really efficient, really effective, and to a large extent secure ways for distributing apps and keeping them up to date in both platforms. But again, you can't rely on them completely. I mean, there are every couple of weeks we see reports of rogue apps getting past the App Store defenses, and that's only going to become, for people certainly in Europe, that's only going to become more of a problem with the opening up of the Apple App Store to third-party app stores as a result of the various actions against Apple from a competition perspective, and that's happening in Europe now. It's likely to happen in other jurisdictions in the not too distant future. And the final one is, MFA. MFA is brilliant. Our phones are great as tools for MFA, but it's not a panacea. You ultimately don't want your employees having to be exposed to the risk that if they click on the wrong link, if they make the wrong assessment, or they're just a little bit thoughtless at a particular moment in time, going back to your original scenario, Craig, at the start of the call, we don't want to have to rely on that. We need to make sure that there's tooling in place to prevent people clicking on those links or when they click on them, getting to the bad places, because the attackers are ahead of us in relation. We've put MFA. They've met that challenge. It isn't a panacea.
Yeah, just to add to that, obviously, it's good to have tools in place, but it's good to have layered tools, right? Rather than depending on one thing, it's nice to have something to catch it in the background if the tool fails for whatever reason. So, you know, having MFA in place is great, but having something to ensure that if something was clicked and it is taking you to a page that isn't legitimate, that is also captured, because you've got double, triple chances to not actually fall victim to some of these problems. So as well as that, it's not all about the protection. You've got to do prevention as well. So it's important to do cyber simulations and training. Don't just focus on emails. You've got to focus on the different types of phishing attacks and social engineering attacks that are coming through, as Colm mentioned earlier, SMS, WhatsApp, and obviously QR codes and the like. Got to make sure that the devices are patched regularly. The whole reason that security updates are happening is because they're patching security vulnerabilities. If you're not running the latest patch, then obviously there's some vulnerabilities that are open in your phone. Not everything is to fix bugs and bring feature improvements. A lot of it, most of it, is about actual patching of exploits. Also, it's good to establish conditional access policies. So if your device isn't up to scratch, if it's running an outdated firmware, if it's not running specific security patches, or it has some malware installed, you don't want it accessing your systems. Or if it's the user is trying to access something it shouldn't, again, you don't want it accessing your systems, because we don't know if there's malware on the devices, or if there's elevated privileges. We've got to kind of keep that access policy in place to make sure only things that meet the certain standard can access the network. And it's important to deploy, advanced threat detection and respond to your mobile endpoints in the same way as you would your workstations, your servers. These things are running your important systems, and so is your mobile phone. You've got to make sure that you're running the same level of security on that as you would your other workstations. We mentioned mobile phones a lot here, but actually iOS devices and Android devices are going beyond mobile phones. You've got tablets, you've got TVs, you've got all sorts that are running these systems. A waitress might be taking an order on a cafe floor somewhere, a restaurant floor, on a tablet. So these things can be vulnerable as well. So you've got to make sure that everything is locked down, not just your employees and their devices, but also what's used in production if you're running restaurants and things like that. So we mentioned here about the cybersecurity audit. Welcome to Scan the Code. It is legitimate code. If you've not already answered the poll question, which I know lots of you have. So throughout the chat, I've seen quite a few questions coming in, so that's good. And we've got the first one here from, and I'm going to pronounce your name wrong. I want to say Craig Duggan, but I'm sorry if I've spelled that wrong. My Gaelic pronunciation isn't too good here. So mobile devices are a bit personal. How do you handle the privacy concerns when it comes to mobile security? Colm, could you take that one, please?
Yeah, happy to take that. It's a great question, and frankly, when we set the company up, it was probably really at the core of our thinking, because people are we use mobile. No, even if it's a corporate device, you can say it's a corporate device. The reality is everybody uses it for personal as well. That there's no sort of strict delineation between our corporate and our professional, shall we say, and our personal lives on mobile. I mean, they're just mixed up. So we, when we looked at this, we said, look, we got to do this in a way that's maximize a minimum. Well, a better way of putting it is, avoids your employer having to surveil your phone in order to deliver privacy, or to deliver security. So how do you make sure that we can be protected, but without having to actually put the employees under surveillance? And I think there are technical approaches that allow you to do that. I think the core of it is to do as much of everything on the device as you possibly can. That's actually an approach that Apple champion as well themselves. So because they recognize, I mean, it's obvious from the architecture that if you're doing all the work on the device, you don't need to take the data off the device. So the data stays under the control of the device owner. So that's very much the way of approaching it. And then it's a question of just not, I think the key there is that if you make that kind of promise to your employees, that it's not weasel words, because too often we see, unfortunately, tech companies will say, well, your data will not be shared with others. Of course it won't, right? But that doesn't mean that you don't assume that means that your data is not being shared with your employer, right? So, being really, when you're saying to your employees, we're not collecting this information, that needs to be not just we're not showing it on the console to your IT staff. It's got to be you're actually not collecting the information. I mean, a great example of this is location. A number of vendors in this space actually require employees to give permission for location when they install their app. Now, they tell us they don't, and I believe this. I don't think they use it in any malign way. But even asking an employee for location permission on a phone, it's just not a good place to go. So, avoiding those kind of own goals, I think, is really important from an employer's perspective.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously GDPR is a big thing in Europe. How does this kind of service and what you need to do? I mean, what you've said there, things are done on your own device. You're not transferring data out. It seems to be, GDPR compliant. Could you speak to that, please?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So what's interesting about our approach, I would say, is that it travels well because it agrees with a very high baseline, as in be GDPR compliant. It means that if you're GDPR compliant and if you are meeting the kind of standards that we find on this side of the Atlantic, you will have no issue with meeting the standards in other jurisdictions. Often when we talk to North American customers, they're actually quite surprised that we don't collect that data, and surprised in a good way. But then we explain where we came from and what our thinking around that was, and they really like that, because they know, frankly, that it's the US in particular is a little bit behind on this, and there is some legislation coming through in some states, in California, for instance, that will up the thresholds in terms of employee privacy. But the great thing is for our customers, they can be confident that when those changes come, that they're in good shape. In fact, to put it another way as well, and one of the great things when we talk to prospective customers is the people we're talking with are always saying, "Oh God, we're going to have to bring this to our DPO," and they're going to get really antsy about it. It's going to delay the project. And the great thing with what we do when we talk to DPOs, it's like, yeah, there's nothing to see here, frankly.
Oh, that's really good news. Easy implementations is something we're definitely all for. Another thing that springs to mind is obviously you have we install an app, decisions are made on the device. What's stopping, two-pronged question really, what's stopping an employee from removing Corrata and removing the application from the device? Can he still access corporate data at that point? And what's then ensuring that if that is the case, what's ensuring that they can't access data if it's not installed?
Yeah, so it's another great question. I mean, look, to be honest, part of the reason for our approach to privacy was to make sure that employees would be okay, not alone with having the software deployed on their phones, but they wouldn't spend their time trying to tamper with it. So, if anyone who's been in this industry for any length of time knows that when you're putting endpoint security solutions on devices, that there are, one of the things you have to have at least the acquiescence of your employees to do it. No, even if you have really good technical ways of locking it down. Now, as it happens on mobile phones, yes, in certain deployment scenarios, you can actually lock it down, but in reality, we take the view that there are always circumstances in which an employee, on a mobile device, in which an employee can remove the software. So what's the protection? So how do we make sure that, when that happens? One, we try to make sure people are comfortable with it, and our experience has been that we don't have this. But if it were to happen, the employee would then lose all access to corporate information. So I remember going back to that check I talked about for bring your own devices. It also apply, as in you're not allowed into the corporate network or the corporate application if we can't confirm that the device is secure. Well, the same applies to corporate owned devices as well. So that's that is your second line of defense. First, make sure it's not interfering with the employee's normal use of their phone, of their device, and then and that they're comfortable from a privacy perspective. And then if for whatever reason still there's someone who removes it inadvertently or deliberately, the access to the corporate network goes away.
Okay, so thank you. So going back to BYOD then, so if customers have or if employees have BYOD devices and they refuse to install Corrata, in the same vein then you can set up policies to ensure that they don't have access to corporate data then unless they kind of conform to what's being required. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean that's fundamentally it. I mean it's a what would I say, it's a deal with the employee. I mean the employee can be more productive, get their job done in a more flexible way. So let's take a ridiculous example. You have to pop out. You're working from home. You have to pop out for a few minutes to collect the kids from school. You've got your application on the mobile phone with access to your corporate application while you're walking down to the school. You're able to get that work done. So that flexibility, it does come with a level of responsibility then, which is to say, well, look, if you're going to do that, you need to have this security software running on the phone, making sure that the device is secure.
Yep. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Colm. I think we're going to wrap that up there. So I appreciate your questions. Thank you. And also thank you very much, Colm, for joining us today. I think it's been a good talk and appreciate your insights. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, great. And thanks again for having me, Craig. It's great to work with Constant Date. Take care.
All the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.